All right. So we've got like a whole stack of research here
Yeah.
about the mind, and we're really diving deep today into like what it is, how it works, and how is it different from the physical brain? All those big questions.
Yeah, and your sources really do a great job of exploring this from a whole bunch of different perspectives. So I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting to kind of pull out some of those threads
Okay.
and see what new insights we can uncover.
Yeah, awesome. So, I mean, one of the things that I noticed in your notes is you've highlighted all these different definitions of the mind. Like
Yeah.
what stands out to you in how the mind is described?
Well, there's definitely like a common thread running through all of these different definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really this idea of the mind as the seat of our cognitive faculties.
Okay.
Like it's the engine behind our thoughts and feelings
Yeah.
and actions. So it's not just like a static thing,
You
it's
know,
like a dynamic process.
I like that. Like the mind as a verb, not a noun.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
And one source actually uses this great analogy of software and hardware.
Oh, okay.
So the mind being the software that's constantly running on the hardware of the brain.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like we get the physical brain, but then there's like the software that makes it go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
But then, I mean, then we bump into this whole concept of consciousness.
Right.
Like how do we go from, you know, neurons firing to actually experiencing the world?
Yeah. It's a big question.
Yeah, and you flagged an article that really dives into this idea of the hard problem of consciousness.
Right.
What is that all about?
Yeah. So the hard problem basically boils down to this. How do physical processes in the brain create subjective experiences?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can observe brain activity when someone sees the color blue,
Okay.
but how does that activity actually become the feeling of seeing blue?
Oh, wow.
That's the real mystery.
So like we haven't quite bridged that gap yet, like scientifically. Like with all of the advances that we have in neuroscience, where do you think the biggest hurdle lies in kind of making that leap?
Yeah, I think the real challenge here is that consciousness is inherently subjective.
Oh,
Like we experience it from the inside out, right?
right.
And it's really difficult to objectively study something that's so personal and internal.
Right.
I mean, science excels at measuring the physical world,
Yeah.
but consciousness seems to operate on a whole different level.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like how do we even approach understanding something that's so elusive? Like is that even possible?
Yeah. And this is where I think philosophy steps in,
Okay.
because while science can probe the mechanisms,
Mm-hmm.
philosophy can grapple with the nature of consciousness itself.
Okay.
And your sources actually touch on two major philosophical viewpoints: dualism and materialism.
Oh, right. Yeah, those were in my
Right.
notes.
Yeah.
Can you like just give me like a quick refresher on those two perspectives?
Sure, yeah. So dualism, which was championed by thinkers like Descartes, argues that the mind and body are distinct entities.
Oh, okay.
So the mind is non-physical, a separate substance from the material brain.
Okay.
Now, materialism, on the other hand, proposes that the mind is ultimately a product of physical processes
Oh,
in the brain.
yeah.
It's kind of like an emergent property of matter.
So like dualism says mind and body are separate, while materialism says that they're one and the same.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it.
And these two viewpoints have like profoundly different implications for how we see ourselves and the world around us.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it makes you wonder too, like if materialism is correct and consciousness just arises from matter, could we then replicate consciousness in a machine?
That's a great question, and actually that's something that your sources delve into a bit later on.
Okay.
But before we jump ahead too far, I do want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, this
Yeah.
idea of the unconscious mind. This is an area that I think often gets overlooked in these discussions.
Yes, the unconscious mind. I mean, it always seemed a bit mysterious to me, like something straight out of like a psychology textbook.
Right, right.
Yeah. What are some of the key insights from the research you've reviewed?
Well, one study that you highlighted found that unconscious bias can significantly impact decision-making,
Okay.
even when people believe they're being totally objective.
Oh, wow.
So this really suggests that there are these factors that we're not even aware of that can influence our choices and actions.
So it's not just about like Freudian slips and repressed memories.
Yeah.
The unconscious is like actively shaping our behavior all the time.
Exactly, yeah. It's like, think of it like an iceberg, right?
Okay.
The conscious mind is that tip that we see above the water.
Mm-hmm.
But the vast majority of mental activity is happening beneath the surface, in the unconscious.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of unsettling.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like, is there any way to become more aware of these unconscious influences?
That's something that researchers are actively exploring.
Okay.
One promising avenue is mindfulness meditation.
Okay.
So by training our attention, we can actually learn to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows us to start gaining insights into our own mental patterns.
So it's about cultivating a kind of like inner awareness.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So now your materials also listed a bunch of like specific cognitive functions of the mind.
Right.
It feels like a bit of a laundry list though. Like
Yeah.
can we make this a little more concrete? Like how can we understand these functions in like a more relatable way?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a great example is that article you sent about the impact of social media on attention spans.
Okay.
It mentions how the constant stream of notifications and updates
Right.
can really overload our working memory.
Yeah, I remember highlighting that because like it was arguing that our brains weren't designed for this kind of like constant digital stimulation.
Exactly, yes.
But yeah.
So that's like a real-world example
Right.
of how one cognitive function, working memory,
Hmm.
which is our ability to hold information in mind for short periods,
Mm-hmm.
is being challenged by the modern digital environment.
That's a great way to connect the dots. Like
Yeah.
it makes these functions feel a little more relevant to our everyday lives.
Totally, yeah. And it's not just about attention, right?
Right.
There's also decision-making, language processing, problem-solving. I mean, all these functions are constantly interacting to shape our experience of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much is going on inside our heads without us even realizing it.
It really is.
It's like we're running this complex software all the time.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
But speaking of software, I mean this brings us back to the question of artificial intelligence. Like,
Yeah.
could a machine ever truly replicate the complexity of the human mind?
Yeah.
Could it ever become conscious?
Yeah, that's the debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we already have AI that can beat humans at chess and write poetry.
Yeah.
But is that true intelligence?
Right.
Or is it just really good mimicry?
Yeah.
One of your sources, a philosopher named David Chalmers,
Okay.
talks about this idea of qualia.
Qualia.
Yeah, and it's basically the subjective, qualitative feel of experience.
Okay.
So, for example, the redness of red or the feeling of pain.
Okay.
So qualia is really like what it's like to experience something.
Okay.
And Chalmers argues that even if AI can mimic human behavior perfectly,
Yeah.
we can't know for sure if it's actually having subjective experiences.
Right.
It might just be processing information without any inner feeling.
So even if it passes like the Turing test and it fools us into thinking it's human, we still can't know what's going on inside its mind.
Right, we're just guessing.
Yeah, that's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
Yeah, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it does raise a lot of really important questions
Yeah.
about how we design and interact with AI in the future. But I think what's also interesting is that even with all these incredible advancements in AI,
Right.
there's still so much that we don't understand about our own minds.
That's a great point. Like we're trying to create artificial minds while we're still grappling with the mysteries of our own.
Exactly.
It's like trying to build a spaceship
Right.
before we fully understand gravity.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good place to stop for now, but
Yeah.
we'll pick up this conversation in part 2.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So join us then.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, it really is humbling when you think about it like that.
Yeah.
And one of your sources actually dives into a project that's trying to do just that,
Okay.
tackling this head on.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Human Brain Project.
Okay.
Have you heard of it?
Yes. I was blown away by like the sheer scale of it.
Yeah.
They're basically attempting to simulate like the entire human brain
Right.
on a computer.
That's the goal.
It's a massive collaborative effort with researchers all over the world
Mm-hmm.
working to map the connections between billions of neurons.
Yeah.
It's like creating a digital replica of the most complex structure in the known universe.
It's incredible. Like the ambition of it is just, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But why go to all this trouble? What are they hoping to learn?
Well, I think one of the main goals is to understand how consciousness emerges
Okay.
from neural activity.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can model the brain in sufficient detail,
Right.
they believe that we might actually be able to observe the processes
Okay.
that give rise to subjective experience.
It's like trying to reverse engineer the human mind.
Yeah, in a way.
But even if they succeed in creating this like perfect simulation,
Hmm.
would that really tell us what it's like to be conscious?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Some philosophers would argue that even a perfect simulation wouldn't capture the essence
Right.
of subjective experience. Others believe that if the simulation is complex enough,
Yeah.
consciousness might actually emerge naturally, just as
Right.
it does in biological brains.
So like it's possible that we create this thing and then suddenly it's like, "Hello, I'm here."
Right, exactly. It's like, oh, wow, it worked.
Wow, that's mind-boggling to think about.
It is.
I mean, and it raises all sorts of ethical questions too, right? About like
Yeah.
the potential for artificial consciousness.
Yeah, it's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, yeah. But I kind of want to shift gears for a second and go back to something you mentioned earlier about the unconscious mind.
Mhm.
You mentioned that studies showing how unconscious bias can impact our decisions.
Yeah,
Are there other examples of like the unconscious impacting our lives in kind of surprising ways?
absolutely, yeah. One of the articles you sent explores how our early childhood experiences
Okay.
can shape unconscious beliefs and patterns of behavior
Hmm.
that influence us throughout our lives. So even if we don't consciously remember these experiences,
Right.
they can still have a powerful impact
Wow.
on our emotional responses, our relationships, even
Yeah.
our physical health.
So like stuff that happened to us when we were kids is like affecting us now, even though we don't even remember it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But is there any way to break free from these unconscious patterns?
Mhm.
Like, can we reprogram our minds, so to speak?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that therapists and researchers have been exploring for decades.
Okay.
One approach is to try and bring those unconscious patterns into conscious awareness.
Mhm.
So by recognizing how our past experiences are shaping our present,
Right.
we can start to make more conscious choices.
So it's about like gaining insight into our own like mental processes.
Exactly,
Right,
yeah.
right.
It's about becoming more aware of the why behind our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And there are a number of different tools and techniques that can help with this.
Okay.
Therapy, journaling, mindfulness practices,
Right.
even creative expression.
So it's not about erasing the past or pretending it didn't happen.
Right.
It's about understanding how it's influencing us
Yeah,
and then making like conscious choices moving forward.
precisely.
Okay.
And it's important to remember, too, that the unconscious mind isn't all bad.
Right.
It can also be a source of creativity, intuition, and wisdom.
Okay.
So it's really about learning to work with it rather than against it.
That's a great perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about like demonizing the unconscious,
Right.
but about, understanding its power and
Mhm.
learning to kind of harness it for good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, speaking of harnessing power, your research also touched on some more like experimental approaches to enhancing mental capabilities,
Right.
particularly in the realm of psychedelic research.
Yeah.
I sent you that article about the potential therapeutic uses of psilocybin,
Yeah.
the active compound in magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical at first.
Yeah. I understand.
It seemed a bit, out there.
Yeah. It's definitely an area that's been shrouded in controversy and misinformation for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But the research is starting to catch up, and I
Yeah.
think the results are quite intriguing.
Okay.
For example, there are studies showing some promising results using psilocybin to treat conditions like depression, anxiety, and addiction.
Wow, that's surprising.
Yeah.
I've heard about like microdosing for creativity, but using psychedelics to treat like serious mental health conditions.
Right?
How does that even work?
Well, it's still early days
Yeah.
in terms of fully understanding the mechanisms,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems that psilocybin in these controlled therapeutic settings
Okay.
can temporarily disrupt
Okay.
the normal patterns of brain activity.
Hmm.
And this allows for new connections and insights to emerge.
It's like shaking up the snow globe of the mind
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
and allowing things to settle in a new configuration.
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard people describe like psychedelic experiences as being deeply insightful
Yeah.
and even life-changing.
Hmm.
But isn't there like a risk involved?
Yeah.
I mean, psychedelics can also induce hallucinations and altered states of consciousness.
Right.
That sounds a bit, risky, especially for someone who's struggling with a mental health condition.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to raise those concerns.
Mhm.
That's why this kind of therapy should only be conducted
Okay.
under the guidance of trained professionals.
Right.
And it's not appropriate for everyone.
Okay.
The research protocols are very strict.
Okay.
They involve careful screening of participants,
Mm-hmm.
controlled doses,
Okay.
and supportive therapeutic environments.
So it's not about like recreational drug use.
No.
It's about like harnessing the potential of these substances for therapeutic purposes
Right.
in a safe and responsible way.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about exploring new frontiers in mental health treatment
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that these substances,
Okay.
when used appropriately,
Mm-hmm.
might offer profound benefits.
It's certainly pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible.
Yeah, it really is.
And it makes me think about all the other ways that we might be able to enhance our mental capabilities
Right.
in the future. Like, it seems like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, I think we really are.
Yeah.
And it's not just about drugs or technology.
Right.
There's also a lot we can do to enhance our mental well-being through lifestyle choices, mindfulness practices,
Yeah.
cultivating healthy relationships.
It's like we have this incredible instrument, the mind,
Hmm.
but we often don't realize its full potential.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about learning to play the instrument, to fine-tune it,
Mm-hmm.
to make beautiful music with our minds.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
But speaking of instruments, there's another dimension to this conversation I want to touch on. The philosophical implications of mind research. I included some really thought-provoking readings on this topic.
Yeah, you're right. The mind isn't just this biological entity.
Right.
It's also a source of these really deep philosophical questions
Mm-hmm.
about who we are,
Yeah.
what it means to be conscious,
Right.
and what our place is in the universe.
Like what does it even mean to have a self?
Yeah.
Are we just a collection of thoughts and experiences?
Right.
Or is there something more enduring that defines who we are? It's a question that has fascinated philosophers, for centuries.
It has, and I think as our scientific understanding of the mind evolves,
Yeah.
these philosophical questions become even more compelling.
Right, right.
One of the articles that you sent by a philosopher named Thomas Nagel
Okay.
explores this idea of what it's like to be a bat.
Yes, I remember that one. He argues that we can never truly know what it's like to experience the world from the perspective of a bat,
Exactly.
even if we could map its brain perfectly.
Right? We can understand the mechanics of it,
Right. Yeah.
but we can't know what it feels like.
Yeah, yeah.
And that raises some really profound questions about the limits of our knowledge
Okay.
and the nature of subjective experience.
Yeah.
It suggests that there are aspects of consciousness that might always remain mysterious,
Okay.
even as we gain a deeper understanding of the brain.
Yeah, it's a bit humbling, isn't it?
It is.
To think that there might be like whole realms of experience
Yeah.
that are inaccessible to us
Yes.
simply because of the limitations of our own minds.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But I think it also underscores the importance of humility and curiosity.
Okay.
As we explore these profound questions,
Mm-hmm.
we need to be open to the possibility
Yeah.
that there's much more to the mind than we currently understand.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about approaching the mind with a sense of wonder and awe,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that we're dealing with something truly extraordinary. Okay, so I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here.
I'm sure.
From simulating the brain to exploring the unconscious,
Yeah.
from psychedelic therapy to the philosophical mysteries of consciousness.
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it really has.
Yeah.
As we wrap up part 2,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the key takeaways that you want our listeners to ponder?
Well, one thing that keeps coming back to me is the sheer plasticity and adaptability of the mind.
Okay.
It's not this fixed entity. It's something that we can actively shape and cultivate
Okay.
through our choices, our
Mhm.
experiences, and our practices.
So it's not just about understanding how the mind works.
Right.
It's also about how we can use that understanding to live, richer, more fulfilling lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about harnessing the power of the mind
Mm-hmm.
to cultivate well-being, to foster creativity,
Right.
to navigate challenges with resilience,
Mm-hmm.
and to connect with others in meaningful ways. I
Right.
mean, we have this incredible tool at our disposal,
Okay.
but we often don't realize its full potential.
It's like we've been given this amazing gift,
Right.
but we haven't quite figured out how to unwrap it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Like we've been handed this incredible toolbox, but haven't quite learned how to use all the tools.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And the good news is we're constantly discovering new tools and new ways to use them.
Right.
I mean, just think about the progress that's been made in recent years in areas like neuroscience, psychology, and even artificial intelligence.
It's amazing to consider how much we've learned about the mind, but at the same time, it feels like we're just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. We've made incredible strides in understanding the brain and its functions, but the big questions about consciousness, subjective experience, and the nature of the self are still very much open for debate.
It's almost as if the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
It's the beauty of scientific inquiry, isn't it? It's a process of continual discovery, of peeling back layers of complexity and revealing new mysteries underneath.
It's like exploring a vast, uncharted territory, and every new discovery leads to more questions and more avenues to explore.
And that's what makes the study of the mind so endlessly fascinating.
What?
It's a journey that never truly ends, and it's a journey that each of us can participate in simply by paying attention to our own thoughts, feelings, and experiences.
So it's not just about scientists in labs with fancy equipment. It's
Yeah.
about all of us being curious about our own minds.
Exactly. Every time we reflect on our own thoughts, every time we try to understand why we feel a certain way, every time we make a decision, we're engaging in a kind of personal mind research.
It's like we each have our own inner laboratory,
Yeah,
and we're constantly conducting experiments whether we realize it or not.
I love that. And the more we pay attention to these inner experiments, the more we can learn about ourselves and the workings of our own minds.
So what are some practical steps that we can take to cultivate a deeper understanding of our own minds?
Well, one of the simplest yet most powerful practices is mindfulness.
Okay.
It's about paying attention to the present moment without judgment, noticing our thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they arise.
I've heard a lot about mindfulness, but I have to admit I'm not always very good at it.
Yeah.
Like my mind tends to wander
Yeah.
and I get distracted easily.
That's completely normal. The mind is naturally active and restless.
Right.
So the practice of mindfulness is really about gently guiding our attention back to the present moment,
Okay.
again and again.
It's like training a puppy, isn't it?
Yeah,
It takes patience and persistence.
that's a great analogy. And just like with puppy training, the more we practice mindfulness, the easier it becomes and the more benefits we start to experience.
What kind of benefits are we talking about?
Well, studies have shown that mindfulness can reduce stress and anxiety,
Okay.
improve focus and concentration, enhance emotional regulation, and even promote physical health.
Wow, that's quite a list. So it's not just about feeling calmer. It's about actually changing the way our brains work.
Exactly. Mindfulness has been shown to alter brain structure and function, leading to lasting positive changes in the way we think, feel, and behave.
It's almost like we're rewiring our brains
Yeah.
for greater well-being.
In a sense, yes. And the great thing about mindfulness is that it's accessible to anyone, regardless of age, background, or beliefs.
It's like a universal tool for mental fitness.
I like that. And there's so many other tools we can add to our mental fitness toolbox.
Like what?
Well, we've already talked about therapy, which can provide a safe and supportive space to explore our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about creative pursuits? Things like writing, painting, or playing music.
Those can be incredibly beneficial as well. Creative expression can help us process emotions,
Okay.
tap into our intuition, and connect with our inner selves.
It's like giving our minds a chance to play and explore.
Exactly. And when we allow our minds to play, we often discover new insights and perspectives that we might not have found otherwise.
So it's not just about serious self-improvement. It's
Wow.
also about having fun and allowing ourselves to be curious and playful.
Absolutely. The mind thrives on novelty and exploration, so the more we can incorporate these elements into our lives, the healthier and more vibrant our minds will be.
It's like we're constantly expanding our mental landscapes,
Yeah.
discovering new territories within ourselves.
And that's the beauty of the mind, isn't it? It's a universe unto itself,
Yeah.
full of wonder, complexity, and endless possibilities for growth and exploration.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling incredibly inspired after this deep dive into the mind. It's made me realize how much power we have to shape our own mental well-being
Yeah.
and to create the kind of lives we want to live.
I'm feeling inspired as well,
Oh,
and I hope our listeners are feeling the same way.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the journey of self-discovery is inextricably linked to the exploration of the mind.
Beautifully said. The more we understand about the mind, the more we understand about ourselves, and the more empowered we become to live authentically and joyfully.
It's like we're embarking on a lifelong adventure, and the mind is our trusty compass and guide.
And as we continue to explore the vast and mysterious landscape of the mind,
Yeah.
who knows what incredible discoveries await us?
That's an exciting thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed the journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep exploring the universe within.
Yeah.
You never know what amazing insights you might uncover.
Yeah.